Hey, it's Sonia Booker, and I am doing a series called Let's Talk About It. And there's so much to talk about as it relates to real estate, as it relates to wealth building. And I wanted to just kind of lend my voice to this big topic that's going on. And today, let's talk about whether or not we're in a recession. Okay. You know, I mean, it depends on who you ask. I personally think we're like in a recession or we're like heading, very, very, very close to one. But what does that mean? And how do we know? We hear that economists say there's really no real way to tell. There are some signs that go on, but just like everything else, there are signs that aren't necessarily the signs that are usually the signs. Everything is kind of off these days. And so, usually we identify a recession with a growth that's not happening in the economy, a downturn. But then it says like that downturn has to be, consecutive quarters, so you got all of these little nuances to say, are we really in a recession or are we not in a recession? But here's the thing. Our last big recession was in 2008. And I remember, it's hard for me to even think about that I've been in real estate long enough that I may have, survived a couple cycles and recessions and all of that. But here are two things that I want you thinking about. Like, first of all, like I said, I didn't think that I would ever live to tell stories of being in a recession. But here's what I remember about 2008. At that time, my mentor, the late Herman J. Russell Sr., I remember him saying to me, probably like 2 years prior, he started saying like, the market is off. The market doesn't feel, it's not lining up right. Things are off. And I remember just thinking to myself, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm doing very well. Things are moving along very well for me. And, you just start to think like, I don't know. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But, as I really started to process the feeling, because that's what he had a feeling 2 years prior to everything kind of falling apart. And then the year before that, he was really like, really putting more kind of a hands-on, more tangible things to what was going on. And he was like, the prices are raising too fast. The banking is off. Like, there's no way that people should be getting 100% financing, no doc loans, and all of these things that he had identified predatory lending and predatory practices before we really put before we were like, oh, that's what happened. That's why this is so, bad. But he was saying like this is not how markets work. And you're talking about someone who was born in 1930. So as I started like really kind of listening to some of the things he was saying, I was like, well, maybe he knows what he's talking about. I don't know. Maybe I should listen to this wisdom. And he was telling me at the time to start pulling back out of the market, that the market was changing. There was too much volatility in the market. And what he meant by that is at the time, for the investors and the people who remember those times, it was like, I remember prices climbing really, really fast. And I remember people just, having really no investment in the properties. And it was just a lot going on. But at the time, it was real popular to do a lot of kind of fix and flips. And that was something in particular that he told me. He said, you want to kind of start transitioning out of that because with the volatility, the price could drop by the time you're finished, with the project. And it seemed kind of hard to believe. But at the same time, once again, I'm going, this is too much wisdom. This is someone who, at that point, almost 50 years, in the market. So I was like, I should, heed this warning. And I'm glad I did because as I started pulling back and going more into like a rental space and wrapping up and finishing any rehabs or anything that I had going on, because what you saw was like, the decline started to happen, and a lot of people were underwater, or they couldn't sell, or they couldn't get out of properties. And so that's, how that kind of came about during that 2008, period. And so a lot of times when it says it's like the Great Recession of 2008, for me, I kind of laugh at that, and I think like, I knew it was a recession coming in 2006 and in 2007. And so I always tell people it depends on which insight you had. When did you feel that we were in a recession? So it's kind of like that right now, that depending on what area and where you are in the food chain, that you feel things a little differently. And so when I start talking about, are we in a recession? Are we not? I'm looking at things that are happening in the market. I'm looking at the idea that we have an overwhelming amount of properties on the market already, and we have inventory that's pretty stagnant. Then you have foreclosures that are at an all-time high, 20% increase of foreclosures. So we have that, and then we're not even kind of putting in the pre-foreclosures or all of the defaults that are happening even before we get to the point that something's in foreclosure. And you have that happening because the jobs are down, and the unemployment is going up, and you see a lot of these things that are transition. We got a lot of transition in the market. It's almost hard to keep up. But once again, these are all these signs that are happening, that when you start thinking about people, or someone like myself who's been in real estate for 20 years, to be able to say something is off. And sometimes it's just like, when your grandmother or someone used to wake up and they would just say like, my knee hurt, and so that means the weather for the day is gonna be bad. You're like, what does that have to do with anything? I kind of feel that way when I think about the pulse of the market, and now I feel like I channel my, Herman Russell, of knowing and having these feelings about what is going on, because you're so attached to the market. So you feel a lot of the things, and a lot of times you feel them before other people see them. And so what does this mean? The other thing that we hear a lot is that millionaires are made during recessions, and there's a lot of money to be made during recessions. Okay, yes, the answer to that is absolutely correct. And so, but what does that mean for you in particular? Like how does one kind of take advantage of what's going on? Especially if one is not so impacted by all the other things that are going on, like job losses, or rising cost of things that are stretching just your monthly budgets. So you got all of that to worry about. So I think about the idea of how can we make sure as a community that we take advantage of some of the plethora of assets that are on the market, and somewhat of fire sales that are going on even now in terms of lowering prices. And you can look on any a platform, and you'll be able to see the massive amount of price cuts that are happening in the market. You'll see that things are staying on the market over your 60 days, over your 90 days, even, a lot of 120 days, cycles that are not normal, and that puts a lot of pressure on the market. So you don't have, you have sellers here trying to sell a property for whatever reason, relocation, job loss, all these things, just wanting to move up. So you look at that, and then you have, all this inventory, and you don't have enough buyers that feel confident enough in the market to jump out there. So, by the time, I tell people all the time right now, especially if you're waiting for the interest rate to go down, that's not necessarily a good thing or a good practice to do, because sometimes when that happens, if when the interest rate goes down, the inventory can go up. Now you have more people, all the people who were waiting on the interest rate to go down are now those same people that are now jumping out in the market and buying in the marketplace. So you're now, in a situation where you had less, competition. Now, by you waiting, you're in a bigger pool that had you gone out there and been able to negotiate your best deal. So that's the power that you have in markets like these. You can negotiate deals that you can have sellers buy down interest rates. You can use, a lot of that money to go towards your monthly payment. So it's kind of like you're able to take matters in your own hands, right? So that's really important because everybody thinks, and we do need prices to be lower. We need that to happen. But if you're like a buyer that's looking for a property and you're in a position to buy right now, that's a good position to be in. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you don't overpay for the property, but you also want to use a lot of that negotiating ability to do things like pay down your interest rate, have seller cover more of your closing costs, and really use that to keep more of your money in your pocket, and then be payment conscious, but make sure that it works, and maybe you're not so price point conscious, if that makes sense. So you got to look at all the different factors and really understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But this is a really good time when you have these things happening, that if you're in a position and ready to buy, this will be a great market for you to look for a good deal and negotiate you a good deal. The second thing is, especially if you're a real estate investor or you're looking to say, how do I, get involved and benefit in a market that somewhat has fire sales going on, and knowing that we haven't even reached the tip of the iceberg, it's really, really, really important that we look at alternative strategies to make sure that we're in positions to participate in this market. Now, as an individual investor, that's really great. And but here's the thing: as an individual investor, we're not talking about 2008, 2009 prices, in terms of entry prices. And so, even though we're seeing prices drop and things come down, there will be those opportunities that you're going to have your investors be able to jump on. And okay, great. Sonia's going to go and do 5, and John's going to do 2, and Sally's going to buy 10. But there's still hundreds out there, and the opportunity becomes massive for one person. So one of the things that I think is really key that we look at, from a community standpoint, is doing what's called cooperative economics or group economics. And both of those, or that category of thought process, is that is power in numbers, and you're increasing buying power. And that's really important because also, if as you're increasing buying power by increasing numbers of people that are saying, instead of me going to get my one, I might go get my one, but I also want to participate in 10 other ones, by being able to stretch my money and leverage my money through, the power of group investing. I'm already seeing that there's this pullback in the market when you start thinking about banks, because the thing that we go to immediately is OPM. We love OPM, and that's other people's money. And when you start thinking about that, what we saw in 2006, 2007, and 2008, one of the ways that we were able to really signify that we were like the ship was sinking is because you had banks that started pulling loans and pulling credit lines and pulling back because they're banks, and they're like, went into a very, very conservative position, which rightfully so. If you were the bank and you started seeing some of these things happening, you started protecting your interest or your, consumer's interest or, that kind of thing. But we're already seeing a lot of repositioning of banks saying, we don't want to do this, we'll do this, we won't lend this amount of money. The guidelines are, again, changing by the day because they're also seeing that there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And when there's all this consumer confidence that doesn't feel there, and people don't feel confident enough to go out and just go shopping and traveling and doing all these things that they would normally do. So banks and interest rates and everybody starts to feel the slowdown that's happening, and it doesn't make anybody feel good about going out making large purchases. So when that happens, the bank is not making the same amount of interest rates that they're making from your payments and from you spending money and all the things that are happening. So they start to protect themselves. So as we see that, we have to make sure that there are other alternatives that we have to be able to still take advantage and do the things that we need to do from a community standpoint, and to take advantage of the opportunity that will be presented. So I want to leave you with this information so that you can start thinking about, how am I going to position myself? If a recession is coming or a recession is here, you want to start thinking about, how am I going to position myself? What are some of the things that I should be thinking about? And how am I going to take advantage of the opportunities that could be coming down the pipeline? Next, you want to look at, who are some of the people that I can, invest with, that would be part of my group, that I can cooperate with in terms of seeing things the same way that I see them, around the opportunity and around um, understanding that there's power in numbers. And then the third thing is like, okay, once you identify that, that's friends, that's family, that's colleagues, that's, different people in different groups that you're involved in, to start having these conversations, then you want to just consult with an attorney to get your paperwork together around that transaction. And really, it's just that simple. Don't let that be a daunting task that keep you from realizing any benefit or opportunity that is happening in the marketplace, because you are afraid to find a group of people or to invest with a group of people, because we see that a lot, and we really, really, really have to find a way to overcome those fears, or that uncertainty around what would that look like, because we're going to miss a lot if we stay in that fear factor. And so once you have that paperwork, once you form those joint ventures and those group contracts and all of that, it was going to specify what everyone needs to do in the transaction. This is who's bringing money. These are silent partner people or silent investor. Then we have these two people are running the group, or everybody has to vote in the group, or however you see that going. But just make sure that you start having these conversations and you start thinking about those type of things, so that you can exercise and benefit from the power of numbers. Okay, well, I'm glad we got to talk about a recession and a real estate recession and a real estate bubble, and kind of where we are in the real estate market as it relates to the time that we're in. And I hope that this was helpful, and that you can start thinking about how you're going to reposition yourself or position yourself to make sure that you take advantage of the recession. Until the next time, happy wealth building.